Good morning. We ring this peace bell to come together as one and to affirm the peace that we hope for this world. Our gathering music today is performed by Broadway artists and was recorded in 2016 as a fundraiser in support of LGBT community of Florida, following the shooting massacre at the Pulse nightclub. Today, the words and the sentiment apply to our current crazy and crisis climate. Please enjoy. That was so powerful to hear all those voices, wasn't it? Singing for such a great cause. Good morning and welcome to Granite Peak Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Prescott, Arizona. I'm Karen Hagberg and I am honored to be your worship associate today. We extend a warm welcome to all of you. We're glad you are able to join us and I hope that you are in good health. We want to stay connected, so please join us for breakout chat rooms after the service. This will give you time to connect in small group conversations. If you are joining us for the first time, please find out more about us by going to our website, prescottuu.org. The mission statement of our congregation is as follows. We are a compassionate spiritual community that celebrates diversity, nurtures the personal and spiritual growth of all ages, shares our gifts, promotes justice for all, and serves the world we live in. We want to extend our thanks to all who contributed to our presentation of the service today. Heather Knowles for technical direction, Marianne Erickson for technical assistance, the GPUUC worship team, and our guest speaker, Dick Shugrue. Dick is an active member of our congregation. He is a former law professor. He taught at the Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska for, and I quote you, many, many years. This will be his 13th presentation and review of the annual Supreme Court decisions. Each year, he helps us to clarify and enlighten us with his wisdom and his wonderful wit. Welcome back, Dick. We're glad to have you today. And although we are physically apart, we are still in community. And we continue with some of our meetings and activities online via the internet. So please continue to check your weekly peak, our website, and the order of service for today. July is Reverend Patty's time away. Her weekly Zoom gatherers will resume when she comes back. We continue to offer the Friday lunch Zoom meetings, but now with the board president, Elaine Hayes. Find that information in your order of service. And 7 of our children and youth are attending virtual UU camp this week at Camp de Benneville. Yahoo! So they're having fun, but we will still have children's faith development after the service at 11:30. If you need to contact, it's Bev Bostrom. And also just a note, the second Monday drum circle scheduled for tomorrow has been canceled due to increase in the COVID numbers. We begin our service in the Unitarian Universalist tradition of lighting the chalice. Our chalice lighter today is Merle Hagberg. And we gather this hour as a people of faith with joys and sorrows, with needs and gifts. We light this beacon of hope, a symbol of our heritage, a sign of our quest for truth, meaning, and justice in celebration of the life we share together and in gratitude for this beloved community. And now, our opening song is If I Had a Hammer, being performed by Peter, Paul, and Mary. I know you know the words because you were all around in the 60s. So please sing along with them and enjoy If I Had a Hammer. Hope that brought back some memories for you. Got to teach it to all our kids today. And now please join us as we say our covenant. The words will appear on your screen. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest for truth, its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve others in community. Thus do we covenant together. And although we are physically apart, it is really nice to see your faces every week when we gather. Our traditions of joys and concerns may be different, but we still continue to struggle with sorrows and to find joys that we celebrate. We know that we are all experiencing this necessary lifestyle change differently. I want to share this poem called Pandemic by Lynn Unger, and it was published recently in the UU World magazine. Pandemic. What if you thought of it as the Jews consider the Sabbath, the most sacred of times? Cease from travel. Cease from buying and from selling. Give up, just for now, on trying to make the world different than it is. Sing, pray, touch only those who you commit your life to. Center down. And when your body has become still, reach out with your heart. Know that we are connected in ways that are both terrifying and beautiful. Know that our lives are in one another's hands. Do not reach out with your hands. Reach out with your heart. Reach out with your words. Reach out all the tendrils of compassion that move invisibly when we cannot touch. Promise the world your love, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, so long as we all shall live. I hold this heart for a moment for all the concerns and joys that were not spoken out loud today. May all of our spirit embrace you and our love fill your heart as you need it. So may it be. Please sing these words of comfort with me. Walking, walking with you, walking with you is our prayer. Now, as we listen to this musical interlude, which would occur normally during our offertory time, take a moment to embrace this feeling of connection and community that we have when we gather each week, whether via Zoom or in person. Let's remember that this congregation and its programs are supported by your generosity. And we also give back to the greater community through our Seeds of Support program. During the month of July, our recipient is Coalition for Compassion and Justice, CCJ. Please read about them in your order of service or the newsletter. To give during the distance time, go to prescottuu.org, bottom left-hand side, and click on the word donate. The link is also available in the chat on this video. What is given is in love is received with gratitude. Blessed be. Please enjoy this musical interlude.
Equal justice under law is not just a caption on the facade of a Supreme Court building. It is perhaps the most important ideal of our society. It is one of the ends for which our entire legal system exists. It is fundamental that justice should be the same in substance and availability without regard to economic status. Justice Lewis F. Powell.
I'd like to thank three people for their continued assistance and facilitation, because without that, we wouldn't be able to get together like this. Mary Ann Erickson has been very helpful to me, and I thank her for coming out to help me today. I'd like to thank Elaine Hayes for her assistance on Wednesdays with our discussion group. And of course, Heather Knowles, professionally helpful and very, very technically proficient. It makes me joyous to be here. You know, folks, in recent years, the Supreme Court of the United States has actually heard and decided very few cases. There are about 7,000 litigants come to the court every year with petitions to ask for the court to give them a hearing, and they don't. They'll only hear about 1% of those cases. Between 2007 and 2018, there was an average of 77 cases a term. And that's only a total of 850 cases before this last term began in October. Then the court agreed to hear 74 cases, but 12 of them got postponed because of the coronavirus, and one was never scheduled, and one was dismissed without any argument at all. So what you get is a really small number of cases that turn out to be very important to the litigants. And some of them are so obscure and so confusing that the average mortal will look at them and say, boy, they could wait and tell me about that in 10 years from now, and I still wouldn't understand. Well, from our circuit, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which includes, of course, California and Arizona and the Northwest states, it's the biggest circuit in the country. There were 10 cases that were taken. From here in Arizona, the court took one case. This was the first year, as you may know, that the court ever heard cases outside of the glorious grandeur of the courtroom itself. And they did that because of the virus, and they did it not by video like we're doing, but they did it by telephone. And one of the most memorable events of this term or any other term took place during one of the arguments on May 6th, and that was the flush heard around the world. Nobody could tell who it was. There was a suspicion that it was Mr. Justice Breyer speaking from his home, but the fact of the matter, people will talk about this for years to come, long after the justices on the Supreme Court have met their eternal maker in the sky. Well, I want to talk with you today about a hit parade of cases that are most important, I think, to normal human beings and most interesting. But you want to watch out for the details in these cases because you're looking for broad, sweeping constitutional mandates and discussion of brand new rules and regulations. You're not going to find that. Most of these cases may deal with the interpretation of a statute or the application of a regulation to some constitutional principle. And even though they may be tremendously important to the litigants or classes of persons, they may be very narrow in their scope. Let me give you an example of this. One of the first cases that's important to us as Arizonans, and I think to people in our congregation who are interested in things like social justice, is the Daca case. This is a case decided 5-4 by the court, Chief Justice Roberts, conservative, writing the opinion for the court. If you remember, this was a situation in which President Obama issued an executive order allowing the children of undocumented immigrants into this country who were not citizens to remain here and go to school and have a path toward citizenship. They never lived anywhere else. America was their only home. When Mr. Trump came into office, he said, nonsense, we're doing away with this. And what he tried to do was abolish the Daca program. And thus the fight began. At the end, Mr. Justice Roberts, for the court's majority in this case, said that Trump's action was arbitrary and capricious, and therefore his attempt to drop Daca would have to fail this time. That didn't mean that Daca was dead forever. It meant that Trump's attempt to do it was improper, and if he wanted to do it right, he'd have to do it over again. Similarly, this session saw cases in the area of church-state relations, and that's always important because one of the principles that we as members of this congregation have is that there ought to be a separation of church and state. There ought not to be any favoritism. So we're looking to see what courts do with that kind of situation. And one of the kinds of intrusions into church-state separation is aid to parochial schools. Now, we've had aid to parochial schools for a long time. We've had busing programs, and textbooks given to the kids, and we've had speech therapists, for example, and we've had the paving of the school breakouts. But Montana had a double whammy because that's one of the many states that had what they call a Blaine Amendment. A Blaine Amendment is a relic from way back in the 1800s, which said that states couldn't provide any kind of tax assistance to any parochial schools whatsoever. Some justices and commentators say this was really a very old anti-Catholic doctrine, but at any rate, it survived and it's in existence in a number of states. Montana had one, as I say. And Montana legislature passed a rule saying that they're going to have a voucher program. That sounds like Arizona, sounds like what we do here. And the voucher program is going to give money to kids in private schools, whether they are just private or whether they are parochial whatsoever. And the Montana Supreme Court said, nuts, you can't do that because we've got this Blaine Amendment that says no can do with aid to parochial schools. Well, it got up to the Supreme Court on the question of whether this was unfair to kids in the parochial schools when the kids in other private schools were getting help. And the court said, yes, it was unfair, and therefore, if you're going to have a program of this nature that gives money to private schools, you got to give them to all private schools. Now, an interesting twist in this case, because Justice Ginsburg, who's one of my favorites, wrote a dissenting opinion, and she said, wait a minute. By the time this case got up to the appellate courts, Montana had already done away with this program. That was a bad idea. But the majority didn't see it that way. If Ginsburg had had her way, the result would have been it was all mooted out and null and void, if you will. There were two other important religious cases that came down just this past week. One of them was a case that involved Obamacare, and whether the persons who were covered by Obamacare had to provide aid to women in reproductive services if they had a religious or a personal ideological opposition to that. And the court said, no, they didn't have to provide this aid. Now, the winner in this case would be the persons who run those entities, hospitals or parochial schools and so forth. The losers were the 70 to 120,000 women who were deprived of the aid for reproductive services in an era of dire need for financial aid for women of any kind whatsoever. The other case was one that came to the court on the basis of what they call a ministerial exception to rules. And what that is kind of legal gobbledygook. And what it means is if a church says it runs a school or a hospital and everybody who works in that is a kind of a minister, they alone get to decide what a minister is. So if they say that we can discriminate against a person who doesn't adhere to those doctrines that we profess, that's okay. It's not unconstitutional. In this case, the employees were the losers, and the winners were the church schools or church hospitals, as it were. Some say that was a victory for religious freedom, but it depends on whose religious freedom you're talking about. There was another interesting case that kind of got mooted out this year, but it was one that ought to be of interest to a lot of people here in the Prescott area. It was a case out of New York called the New York Rifle and Pistol Association. And this case involved an ordinance that New York City had passed so that you can't transport a gun across jurisdictional lines. The owners of the guns obviously thought this was a bad law, and they sued to get it knocked out. At the time the case got up to the courts, the Supreme Court of the United States, in particular, the New York City Council had repealed the ordinance. So the argument is this is moot. And we've talked about mootness in other cases, and we know what that means. Once it's no longer around, it shouldn't be litigated anymore. And so the court said, this is not a live case anymore. Mr. Justice Alito hit the ceiling on this. He said, wait a minute, New York City doesn't have any guts. It passed this ordinance. It knew what it was doing. It should have argued the case all the way up to the Supreme Court. He vented his spleen on this, but he didn't get his way. The next case that I have on the hip parade that you will probably have some interest in is the reproductive rights case itself, the abortion case. The reason this was a very important case, because if it had gone the other way, it would have opened the door to a repeal of Roe versus Wade and all its progeny. This was a case called June Medical Services versus Russell out of Louisiana. And it's an interesting case because Mr. Chief Justice Roberts, once again, the conservative guy, the stalwart of the right on the Supreme Court, had taken the place of Justice Kennedy in being kind of the swing justice on the Supreme Court. The majority opinion is written by Justice Breyer. As I suggest, Roberts said go along with it. Well, what happened here was easy. There'd been a law just like the one passed in Louisiana, passed in Texas 4 years ago. And this law said that any physician who provides abortion services has to be admitted to a hospital within 30 miles of his or her clinic. And the Supreme Court in the Texas case 4 years ago said this is an undue burden on women who are seeking full range of reproductive services, and undue burdens are not allowed under Roe and the cases that followed thereafter. Therefore, the Texas case was unconstitutional, and in this case, the court said the Louisiana statute must fall as well. Now, Chief Justice Roberts came in and said, I agree with the opinion, but I think the right reason is a doctrine called stare decisis, which is more legal mumbo jumbo. And what it means is we've already made the decision. It's well-founded, it's well-reasoned, and there's no reason to change it today. And thus, you can imagine the right wing are just furious with Justice Roberts for taking a couple of cases that go with the left wing rather than the right wing of the court. But, as we will see, he makes up for it in later litigation. Well, the next case that's a great deal of importance, I believe, is the Lgbtq case. This is Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia. And it's a number of cases coordinated together at the same time. The interesting thing in this case is it's, again, a 6-3 opinion, but the decision is written by Mr. Justice Gorsuch. You say, who's Gorsuch? Remember, he was one of the two guys that Trump put on this court, and that he thought would go the way of the Trumpites in everything that he did. Well, you can't guarantee that, whether it's Trump appointing or whether it's Franklin Delano Roosevelt appointing. This case is one, however, that you got to be careful of because it's not a broad and sweeping decision like gay persons have the right to marry as a constitutional matter. It's an interpretation of the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It says you can't discriminate in employment on account of sex. And what the court said here, what Mr. Justice Gorsuch said here was, when a person is trans or if a person is gay, that's included in sex because sex is inevitably part of the discrimination if a person is fired because she or he or they are not allowed to get the employment or keep the employment because of his gender status. This didn't define a new constitutional right, but it was a statutory application, and it was a very important decision for persons of the LGBTQ community and for persons who believe in the rights of human beings in general. There were cases that came down this week that are very important. I want to share them with you. And the first one was the Baseless Electors case. Now, some people have said, what is this case all about? Is it as serious as it sounds? Well, it is, because what it says was, if you are an elector within the electoral college, and you are in a state that has voted, let's say, for Mr. Trump, and you're pledged to vote for Mr. Trump, you can be forced to vote for Mr. Trump. You're not a free agent, and even though it may very well have been that the framers of the Constitution thought that the members of the Electoral College could make up their own mind as to who should be chosen the president, that's not the way it's worked out since then. And some have said that this case means, in effect, the Electoral College is dead as the dodo bird. It's not quite that simple, but it's a very important decision in that it does say that you are bound to vote for the person who won the election in your state, no matter what your personal ideology may be. The last two big cases in the court this term just came down Thursday, and people were waiting for them because they wanted to see whether the court is going to say that Mr. Trump had to release, or people in charge of the holding banks and accounting firms had to release Mr. Trump's financial information. And what the Supreme Court did, in effect, was give a big victory for freedom of that kind of information. Now, this isn't an instant victory. In other words, if you're waiting around to see tax returns of Donald Trump on TV over this weekend, you're out of luck. Both cases said you have to go back to the lower courts and solve a couple of problems, technical problems, before you get it. But the bottom line question of Mr. Chief Justice Roberts says that everybody on the court, that is unanimous court, conservatives and liberals, the latest appointments of the court by Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, all agree no person is above the law. And if there's an appropriate subpoena for his or her records, you got to comply. You've got to give evidence. A wonderful victory for freedom of that kind of information and for the rule of law. Now, I want to conclude today with a couple of quick notes on decisions of courts or decisions under the Constitution that aren't made by the Supreme Court and yet are really, really important. And we realize that not everything is done by the Supreme Court. In fact, as I told you earlier, very little was done by the Supreme Court in terms of the final decision. Well, there are cases that the court doesn't take that are really important, and that it doesn't take the cases is troublesome, I believe. One of those areas is what I call the qualified immunity area. Qualified immunity is simply this. If a police officer beats up a person, it may result in that person's death or dismemberment or something of that nature, or whatever. The fact of the matter is, one thinks you can get redress against the police officer or against the department for which he or she works and so forth. That's not so, because this doctrine of qualified immunity says that person is probably immune from suit unless the plaintiff in the case can show there's an exact case like that in the same circuit, or in the Supreme Court of the United States. And what this means is an awful lot of people go without redress in really horrendous situations. This year, the court had 13 petitions on the qualified immunity issue, and they refused to take any of them. And that, I think, was a big deal of review. Now, maybe they thought that the Congress was going to pass this Police Reform Act and include a qualified immunity measure that would change the rule. Maybe they thought that the election would change the rule. Bottom line is they didn't take it and they copped out of it. This is too bad. Secondly, there are decisions by other courts that are on very important issues, that may preoccupy us in terms of television watching or reading the papers and our immediate attention. One of them, of course, is the question of what we would call prior restraint. Now, prior restraint is a doctrine which says, under the First Amendment of freedom of press, freedom of expression, the government ought not to be stepping in and say, we're going to say you can't say it anymore. Now, there may be consequences for you saying things, but the thumb is on the scale of people who want to express themselves. So John Bolton, you remember the national security guy under Trump, had written this tell-all book on what he thought of Trump and Trump's foreign policy expertise or lack thereof. And Trump stood with everything he could to keep this from being published. Now, a United States District Court judge, and it's interesting because this guy is Ronald Reagan appointment. He's still around. He's very conservative, crusty old man, but very, very frank and honest judicial officer. And he said, there's no prior restraint. We will allow that. Bolton gets to print that book. However, there are consequences to Bolton's actions in the past because he had signed a non-disclosure agreement. Well, that's a contract. He said, in return for giving me the job, working in the White House, I will say that I won't disclose what I learned here. There's a second thing that's supposed to get in the way or could get in the way that may sure very well get in the way in the near not too distant future, and that's the question of the American version of the Official Secrets Act. If you tell some national secret and you don't have a release to do that, that's a crime, and you could be prosecuted for the crime, and Mr. Bolton may very well. But as far as the public is concerned, they've gotten a chance to see and hear what this fellow had to say in a book that's been a bestseller, since it's been on the shelves for about 3 weeks now. The other example of that, of course, is Mary Trump's book. She's the niece of Donald Trump, you know, the daughter of Fred, or the older brother of Donald Trump. And she and the Trump family got into a lot of disputes, let's say, over the estate of the grandfather, old man Fred Trump Sr. He had a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars. And she believed that she was entitled to, she and one other member of the family were entitled to more money than Donald and the older siblings wanted to give her at the time of settling the estate. And she made an agreement if she got her share that she would sign an NDA, also a non-disclosure agreement. However, her publisher never signed such an agreement, and the publisher said, "You can sue Mary, but you can't sue us." Mary went to court to defend herself on this, and the New York State courts said Mary is entitled to the benefits of the doctrine that we talked about a moment ago in the Bolton case, that the prior restraint doctrine. And therefore, the book that's published is going to be on the shelves next Tuesday. And so you can line up and get both Bolton's book and Mary Trump's book and have fun licking your chops over the scandals of the Trump family. Well, that's it. That's what's going to go for this last season. I hope you'll be watching the actions of the court in the next season, because they've already taken some fascinating cases, and I think you will learn a lot about our government and our way of life and the rule of law. Thank you so much for being with me. Goodbye.
All right. Thank you so much, Dick. We really appreciate you helping us understand all those Supreme Court decisions, and we look forward to learning more. If you would like to talk to Dick about his conversation or the Supreme Court decisions, he would like you to join them on Wednesday morning forum. And that information is in your order of service. That's Wednesday morning forum for more time with Dick, where you can actually ask him questions and get his comments. And now we are going to sing our closing hymn. The title is We Are a Gentle, Angry People, hymn number 170. And this one is recorded and sung by Holly Neer. The words are going to be on your screen. And she recorded this about a year ago at another event, a UU event. And she makes a little commentary in the middle about where they are. But take that commentary into your own heart and imagine that we are all sitting together in the sanctuary, and take her words to heart, and then please sing along with us. We are a gentle, angry people. Heather.
We are a gentle, angry people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are gentle, angry people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a land of many colors. We are a land of many colors, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a land of many colors, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a peaceful, loving people. We are peaceful, loving people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a peaceful, loving people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. I just want to say, as you all travel back to your communities, to just take a moment right now to take the sound of this room into your heart, the look of your comrades, something that you learned, some emotion that you had. And when it gets discouraging and seems absolutely impossible, bring back this moment right here, where you know that there were thousands and thousands of people who have worked with you over a lifetime to try to find what it means to be a peaceful person, what it means to be a person who works for justice, what it means to be someone who holds the weight of the horror and at the same time holds the weight of the spectacular beauty of what goes on this planet. And it is our job as conscientious people to be able to hold both parts and move forward with grace and dignity and courage, and you are a great example of that. We are a peaceful, loving people, people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a peaceful, loving people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. Thank you all so much.
Wow, that's great.
Our closing words today are from Robert F. Kennedy. Few will have greatness to bend history itself, but each of us can work to change a small portion of events. It is from numberless, diverse acts of courage that human history is shaped. Let us now extinguish our chalice. Please join us with the extinguished words as they appear on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. I now invite you to take as much time as you wish to visit with your friends in the chat rooms or the breakout rooms. Stay on the screen if you would like to be there. So at this point, stay healthy, be safe, and go bravely forward into your continued efforts of support for justice in the world today. So may it be. Namaste. Thank you.